Kieran had lived on this part of the planet for almost 2 years, though he would never have called it a home. His shelter was small, built from scrap metal and reinforced panels he had scavenged from abandoned mining stations. The winds outside howled constantly, carrying fine red dust that scratched at everything, even through the thick walls. Nights were worse. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It was a living, pressing thing that made every rustle in the storm feel like a threat. Kieran had learned to sleep lightly, always with one eye open, always listening. That night, as he patched a broken window panel with a strip of reinforced metal, he heard it. Not the wind, not the usual scuttling of the planet's small creatures, but a soft, deliberate sound, like a careful step. He froze, listening. There it was again. A quiet, precise movement across the outer metal of the shelter. Whoever or whatever it wasn't native. Native animals didn't move like that. They were noisy, clumsy, predictable. Kieran grabbed his flashlight and a plasma cutter, the only weapon he had ready, and crept toward the sound. He checked the outer perimeter. Nothing. Then, a shadow flickered past the broken ventilation duct. His heart pounded, and he tightened his grip on the cutter. Whoever it was had come inside. He pushed open the metal door cautiously, every sense alert. The shelter looked empty at first, just the usual clutter of tools, storage crates, and his sleeping area in the corner. Then he saw her. She was crouched in the far corner of the shelter, her body small and delicate, with skin that shimmered faintly in the dull light of his lamps. Her eyes were wide and bright, colors shifting slightly, as if reflecting more than just the dim interior. She looked at him, unafraid, curious, and for a moment Kieran felt a strange, almost unbearable weight of being studied. What are you?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. She didn't answer. She didn't run. Instead, she stood slowly, moved toward him with a grace that made every human reflex instinctively hesitate, and then, almost casually, she curled up on the floor beside his sleeping mat. It was the sort of boldness Kieran had only ever seen in the most confident predators. Yet there was no threat in her stance, only a quiet claim to space. Kieran froze, unsure if he should shout, attack, or simply retreat. The girl's eyes followed him, large and unblinking, and she tilted her head, examining him with a mixture of curiosity and something else he couldn't name. Finally, he lowered the plasma cutter slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "You can't just stay here," he said, though he knew it sounded weak, almost absurd, even to himself. The girl blinked, then lay her head on her hands, still on the floor, still close to him. She gave no sign of leaving. It was as if she had already decided that this was her place now. Kieran sighed and sat down a few feet away, keeping his distance. His mind raced. How had she found him? Was she alone? Friendly? Dangerous? He'd faced storms, sandworms, and even hostile scavengers, but this was unknown. This was a life unlike any he had studied or scavenged from old Earth data, and yet he couldn't stop staring at her. Hours passed in tense silence. The storm outside raged on, shaking the shelter and making the walls groan. Kieran checked his scanners. Nothing unusual, no signals, no other life forms approaching. He returned his attention to her. She was asleep now, curling into herself like a cat, small chest rising and falling in steady breaths. Her presence was unsettling and somehow comforting at the same time. Kieran thought back to the first night he had arrived on this planet. He had landed with plans for isolation, safety, and a slow, methodical scavenging of resources. This planet had promised solitude. Instead, now he had an uninvited guest, who seemed to have no fear, no understanding of danger, and no respect for boundaries. Yet there was something almost human in the way she moved, the way she watched him. He couldn't shake the feeling that she understood more than she should. He got up to make some water, careful not to wake her. watching her there, so small, so fragile, and yet somehow strong. Kieran realized something. This was not just a stranger. This was someone, or something, who could change the way he thought about his life here. He had spent so long protecting himself from the harshness of the planet and the indifference of the universe. Now he was faced with protecting someone else. Now the night grew colder and the winds more aggressive. Kieran returned to his corner and sat against the wall, keeping an eye on her. She stirred slightly, opening one eye, and met his gaze. There was no fear, no aggression, only an understanding, almost silent communication. Kieran felt his chest tighten. It was the strangest feeling. Responsibility mixed with curiosity, caution mixed with intrigue. Finally, exhaustion overcame his tension. He leaned back, letting his shoulders relax against the cold metal wall. The storm outside howled. The dust pounded the shelter, but inside, there was a strange stillness. The alien girl slept quietly, and for the first time in a long while, Kieran felt less alone. Morning would bring questions. Questions about where she came from, why she was here, and what she wanted. But for now, in the quiet, ragged shelter on a lonely planet, two lives had collided in a way neither could have predicted. Kieran closed his eyes, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this strange, bold creature beside him was a beginning, not a threat. The universe was vast, dangerous, and unforgiving. And yet, somehow, this small, alien presence made it feel smaller, more manageable, even a little like home. The morning light was weak, filtering through cracks in Kieran's shelter and carrying the fine red dust that had been blowing all night. Kieran awoke stiff and groggy, his back sore from sleeping on the cold metal floor. His first instinct was to check the alien girl. Lyra, he had decided to call her. She was still there, sitting quietly near the corner, watching him with wide, shifting eyes. Kieran blinked at her, rubbing his face. "Morning," he said, though he knew she didn't understand his words. She tilted her head slightly, as if acknowledging him, and that was enough for now. Breakfast was simple, a rehydrated protein pack and water. Kieran carefully placed a small bowl of water on the floor near her. She sniffed it curiously, then sipped delicately, careful not to spill a drop. Her movements were precise and deliberate, unlike anything he had ever seen in an animal or a human child. "Do you eat human food?" he asked, more to himself than expecting an answer. She looked at him and tilted her head again, then dipped her hand into the water and drank. That seemed to satisfy him for now. After eating, Kieran surveyed the shelter. Some minor repairs were needed after the storm, and he realized he couldn't leave Lyra alone while he worked. She followed him cautiously, keeping a safe distance but watching everything he did. She had an almost unnatural attentiveness, her eyes scanning his every movement. As he repaired the ventilation duct, he spoke quietly, describing his actions. "I have to patch this before it collapses again," he said. She didn't respond with words, but she leaned closer, watching the tools and metal pieces with intense focus. Kieran noticed her small hands twitching as though she wanted to help, but wasn't sure how. He handed her a simple wrench. She took it carefully, examining it as if it were a strange artifact from another world. Then, with surprising skill, she mimicked his movements, tightening a loose panel. Kieran stopped for a moment, his jaw dropping. She had learned that fast. No human child would have been able to do this. "You're clever," he said softly, shaking his head. She looked at him, blinked slowly, and returned to her work. He realized then that he wasn't just fascinated by her appearance or presence, her intelligence, her adaptability, her calm curiosity. It all reminded him of why humans had survived so long in a harsh universe. By midday, they were outside the shelter, gathering supplies. Kieran kept his weapon ready, expecting predators or scavengers. Lyra moved beside him, small and silent, but not afraid. She sniffed at the dust, her eyes scanning for movement, when a small native creature, a four-legged burrower with sharp claws, darted past. She froze, her body tense. Kieran instinctively raised his plasma cutter, but she didn't flee. Instead, she reached out, placing a hand gently on the ground. The creature paused, sniffed, then moved along without attacking. Kieran's eyes widened. She had some kind of natural control, a presence that made other beings hesitate. This wasn't just luck. This was skill. This was instinct. And in that moment, Kieran realized he wasn't just protecting her. She could protect him in ways he had never imagined. As they returned to the shelter with scavenged parts, Kieran tried to communicate. He drew simple shapes in the dust, circles for water, triangles for food, squares for shelter. Lyra watched, then traced some symbols herself, her delicate fingers leaving faint glowing marks. He smiled, recognizing the effort. It was clumsy, but it was progress. They were finding a way to understand each other without words. That night, Kieran cooked a small ration over the stove while Lyra watched. The scent of heated protein packs seemed to interest her, but she stepped closer, peering into the makeshift pot with wide eyes, her mouth opening slightly as if tasting the smell through the air. Kieran laughed quietly. "You're not going to eat it raw, are you?" he asked. She blinked, then nodded slightly, a gesture that made Kieran realize she didn't know human customs. He tore a small piece, let it cool, and handed it to her. She tasted it, her eyes widening in surprise at the flavor. She nodded again, and this time, Kieran felt a small warmth in his chest. Their bond was growing, subtle but undeniable. Kieran started leaving small objects for her to explore, old tools, shiny panels, pieces of wire. She experimented with them, twisting, bending, arranging. Kieran watched in fascination. She had creativity, curiosity, and intelligence that rivaled humans he had known in colonies. But life on the planet was harsh, and the peace couldn't last. That night, the wind carried a new sound, mechanical, deliberate, and menacing. Kieran froze, scanning the horizon through a broken window. Distant drones, black and angular, hovered above the dust plains. Their lights swept across the terrain. Lyra stiffened beside him, her body tense. Kieran grabbed her hand instinctively, feeling her small fingers in his. He realized she understood the danger without him saying a word. The drones weren't native. They were searching. And judging by her reaction, they were looking for her. Kieran's mind raced. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why were these machines after her? He didn't have answers, only instinct. He had to protect her. Somehow, he had to keep her safe. The drones landed briefly, scanning the shelter. Kieran pressed Lyra behind a crate, holding her close. She didn't make a sound. They could hear the drones hum, the clanking of metal as the search continued outside. Kieran's heart pounded, but he remained calm, guiding her movements silently. When the drones finally left, Kieran exhaled slowly. Lyra turned to him, eyes wide but calm. She didn't need words to communicate her trust. Kieran realized something important. She had chosen him, as much as he had chosen to protect her. The night grew quiet again, but it was different now. There was tension, a sense that the world outside was watching, waiting. Kieran adjusted his sleeping mat beside hers. She curled up, as she had the first night, and this time he didn't move away. He felt the warmth of her presence, the soft rise and fall of her breathing, and a strange sense of companionship that he hadn't known in years of solitude. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he wasn't alone, where someone, or something, shared the dangers and triumphs of survival. Lyra was more than a visitor. She was a partner in ways he hadn't anticipated, a reminder that intelligence, courage, and curiosity weren't exclusive to humans. The storm outside raged, but inside, there was a fragile peace. Two lives, alien and human, were learning to navigate each other's worlds. And somewhere deep in Kieran's mind, he knew the universe was about to challenge them in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, as he drifted to sleep beside the small, bold creature who had claimed a corner of his shelter, he allowed himself a rare and precious thought. Maybe they could face it together. The day after the drones had left, Kieran woke early, alert. He had slept lightly, listening for any hint of movement outside the shelter. Lyra was already awake, sitting near the doorway, her legs folded beneath her. Her eyes, bright and shifting, seemed more thoughtful today. There was a tension in her small body that Kieran hadn't noticed before. Something was wrong, and he knew it instinctively. "Kieran," she said finally, her voice a soft melodic hum. It wasn't human, but it was close enough that he could recognize it as communication. She had never spoken before. He froze, staring at her, unsure if he should respond. You can talk?" he asked slowly. She tilted her head and repeated the sound. It wasn't words he could understand, but the tone carried meaning. Warning, fear, urgency. Kieran realized the drones had not been random. They were looking for her. Something, or someone, wanted her back. He needed to know why. "Come with me," she said again, this time gesturing toward the small storage area of the shelter. Kieran followed cautiously. She led him to a corner where she had gathered small objects from the past few days, broken devices, scraps of metal, a cracked datapad. She tapped the pad, and faint holographic images flickered to life. Kieran leaned in, surprised. The images were fragmented but clear enough to understand. He saw ships, sleek and dark, descending on cities and forests on distant planets. There were cages filled with beings like her, young aliens with wide eyes and iridescent skin, experiments, restraint devices, and controlled environments. The final image was of a ship approaching her home planet, heavily armed, moving fast. She had escaped from a powerful and dangerous faction, one that captured her species for experiments. Fear, curiosity, and determination shone in her eyes. She pointed at the images of the cages, and then at herself. "You're running from them," he said slowly. She nodded, almost imperceptibly. She reached out and touched his arm lightly, a gesture of trust, and Kieran felt a surge of protectiveness he hadn't experienced before. They spent the morning preparing. Kieran scavenged additional tools and reinforced the shelter's weak points. Lyra moved beside him, helping in ways he couldn't explain. She seemed to sense threats before they arrived, adjusting panels and covering entrances with precision. Her intelligence was astonishing. She was learning his ways, and yet she also had abilities he had never seen. By midday, the distant hum of engines echoed over the dust plains. Kieran froze, scanning the horizon. A small scout ship, black and angular, hovered above. It was sleek, designed for speed and efficiency, a predator in the skies. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She pointed upward, her hand trembling slightly, and Kieran knew they didn't have much time. "Stay calm," he whispered. "We can do this." Lyra nodded, stepping beside him. Her movements were fluid, almost cat-like, as she scanned the surrounding terrain. She noticed a cluster of large rocks near the edge of the plain. She gestured toward them. Kieran understood. Cover, protection, a place to hide. The scout ship descended slowly, scanning the area with bright lights. Kieran's heart pounded as he crouched behind the rocks. Lyra pressed close, her small body against his. He could feel her breathing, steady yet tense. The ship's sensors swept over the rocks, and Kieran held his breath. Then, without warning, Lyra darted forward, moving faster than Kieran thought possible. She activated some device on her wrist, sending a pulse that disrupted the scout ship's sensors. The ship jolted slightly, its lights flickering. Kieran's jaw dropped. She had technology he didn't understand, and she knew how to use it. "Come on!" he shouted, and they ran together toward a narrow canyon he had used before to store water and supplies. The scout ship tried to follow, but the canyon's twists and turns were too tight for its design. Lyra led him with instinctive precision, always a step ahead. Inside the canyon, they paused to catch their breath. Kieran looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. Small, delicate, yet fierce and unyielding. "Who are you really?" he asked. She didn't answer with words, only gestures toward the holographic images on the pad. She had been hunted, experimented on, and yet she survived. She had escaped, relying on intelligence, courage, and now him. For hours they moved cautiously across the planet, avoiding patrols and scanning for signs of danger. Lyra's abilities amazed Kieran at every turn. She could sense the smallest vibrations in the ground, anticipate movements, and even manipulate small devices with skill he could barely comprehend. He realized humanity wasn't the only species capable of ingenuity. That night, they set up a temporary camp in a hollowed-out rock formation. Kieran built a small fire for warmth, while Lyra examined the stars, pointing at constellations he recognized from old Earth charts. She didn't speak, but her gaze was full of questions, curiosity, and wonder. Kieran felt a strange sense of pride. Even in her fear, she was learning, observing, and adapting. "You're smart," he said quietly. She looked at him, blinking slowly. It wasn't arrogance or defiance. It was acknowledgement. She understood, in her own way, that he admired her abilities. For the first time, Kieran felt that their bond was mutual, built not just on protection, but on respect. Morning came, bringing with it another challenge. A larger ship appeared on the horizon, dark and menacing, faster than the scout. Kieran felt a cold sweat. "We can't outrun that," he whispered. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She didn't speak, but she gestured toward a cluster of natural cliffs. Kieran followed her lead. They ran, climbing steep paths and hiding in crevices. The ship's sensor swept past, missing them narrowly. Kieran realized that Lyra wasn't just helping him survive. She was teaching him a new way to think, a new way to adapt, to anticipate, and to use the environment to their advantage. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking a valley filled with abandoned structures. Lyra gestured toward them. Shelter, he understood. It wasn't perfect, but it would give them time to rest and plan. As they moved toward it, Kieran felt a deep sense of connection to this small alien girl. She had forced him to reconsider his solitude, his skills, and his understanding of survival. That night, inside the abandoned structures, they shared a quiet moment. Kieran prepared a simple meal, and Lyra assisted, her hands moving gracefully, mimicking his actions. They ate in silence, but the silence was comfortable, not forced. It was a shared understanding, a bond formed through fear, trust, and mutual respect. As he watched her curl up to sleep, Kieran realized something important. This planet, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had given him an unexpected gift. Lyra had brought danger, yes, but also companionship, wonder, and the chance to see the universe through new eyes. He felt a deep admiration for her courage, her intelligence, and her unspoken resilience. The alien faction would not stop searching for her, that much was certain. But Kieran also knew that together they had the skills, the wits, and the courage to survive. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and full of unknown threats. But he felt a rare certainty. With Lyra by his side, they could face anything. And for the first time since he had arrived on this lonely planet, Kieran felt hope, not just for survival, but for something more, for trust, companionship, and the strange, powerful bond that had formed between a human and an alien girl who had broken into his shelter and claimed a part of his life he didn't even know he was willing to share. Kieran woke to the low hum of the wind over the plateau, The valley below was bathed in pale morning light, but the peace was fragile. He glanced at Lyra, who was already awake, sitting at the edge of the crumbling structure, her eyes scanning the horizon. She seemed more alert than ever, her body tense, her fingers tracing small patterns in the dust, as if mapping out the world around them. He understood without words. The alien faction hadn't stopped searching. They were relentless, and if they found Lyra, there would be no mercy. Kieran stood, stretching his stiff muscles, and gathered the supplies they had scavenged over the past few days. Dehydrated food packs, water canisters, tools, and the small devices Lyra had helped him fix. "We need a plan," he said quietly, though he didn't expect her to reply in words. She nodded, then tapped her wrist device, sending a series of small, faint pulses into the sky. Kieran realized she was sending a signal, but not to the alien faction. She was calling someone else, someone friendly, or at least someone she trusted. They moved cautiously down the plateau, avoiding the open ground. Lyra's instincts guided them, her eyes flicking to every shadow, every movement. Kieran followed, silently grateful for her presence. Without her, he knew he would have been blind to the subtle signs of danger. With her, they moved almost like one being, human and alien, in perfect sync. The first obstacle came sooner than expected. A patrol of small black drones hovered near a narrow pass. Kieran froze, watching their movements. Lyra's hand gripped his arm. She pointed toward a narrow, overgrown tunnel leading beneath a rock outcrop. He understood immediately. It was dangerous, tight, and likely difficult to navigate, but it offered cover. They crawled through the tunnel, the darkness pressing around them. Kieran's breath echoed, and he could feel the tension in Lyra's small body. She pressed close, moving with ease through the tight space. He marveled at her agility, the way she adapted instinctively to every obstacle. Humans had survived countless dangers through ingenuity and resilience, but Lyra's abilities reminded him that survival could take many forms. When they emerged, they were on the far side of the patrol, and the valley stretched ahead of them. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows. Kieran scanned the terrain and saw an abandoned mining settlement in the distance, crumbling, rusted, but it would provide shelter and a chance to rest. Lyra's eyes lit up slightly. She pointed toward it, then toward the sky, indicating it was time to move. They ran, keeping low, weaving between rocks and debris. The sound of engines approached again. Larger ships this time, black and angular, moving with precision and speed. Kieran felt a spike of fear. They couldn't outrun these ships in the open. Lyra's hand found his, squeezing briefly. He understood. Trust, yes, but also confidence. She had a plan. As they neared the settlement, Lyra paused at a tall metal doorway, long, rusted shut. She traced the pattern on the control panel with her fingers. Sparks flickered, lights blinked, and the door groaned open. Kieran stared. "You can do that?" he asked in disbelief. She gave him a small smile, half proud, half teasing, and slipped inside. Inside the settlement was a maze of corridors and collapsed structures. Kieran followed, moving carefully. They found a room that had been relatively intact, a storage area with metal walls, crates, and remnants of old technology. Lyra examined the devices, then activated a small generator powering a dim light. Kieran watched, astonished. She had not only survived, but she could adapt and thrive anywhere, using her intelligence and skill. They rested briefly, eating, drinking, and tending to small wounds from their long run. Kieran spoke quietly, telling her stories of human colonies, survival techniques, and the small victories that kept humans alive in harsh worlds. Lyra listened, her eyes wide, nodding occasionally. He realized that, in some way, she was learning to be human, not just in language, but in resilience, adaptability, and trust. But rest could not last. The hum of the alien faction's ships returned, louder and closer this time. Kieran felt panic rising, but Lyra's calm presence steadied him. She gestured toward the roof of the structure. Kieran understood immediately. They would need to move vertically, use height and shadows to their advantage. They climbed carefully, using loose beams and rusted ladders. From the roof, they could see the ship scanning below. Lyra tapped her wrist device again, sending another pulse. This time, Kieran realized she was calling for help from someone who could reach them faster than the faction. It was a gamble, but it was their only chance. The first ship's searchlights swept close to their position. Kieran crouched, heart hammering, but Lyra's hand was firm on his shoulder. Trust, her gesture seemed to say. They stayed still, shadows blending with the rusted metal. The searchlight passed, and Kieran exhaled slowly, trying not to let relief show too early. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long, fiery shadows across the valley. Finally, small lights appeared in the distance. Human ships, sleek and small, moving faster than the alien faction's vessels. Relief flooded Kieran. Help had arrived, and Lyra's signals had worked. The alien faction's ships reacted too late, attempting pursuit, but the human ships intercepted them. Blasts echoed in the distance, illuminating the valley with brief bursts of fire and energy. Kieran watched in awe as the humans, using clever tactics and advanced technology, outmaneuvered the larger, more powerful enemy ships. It was ingenuity and teamwork that won the day, a classic human victory. Lyra stood beside him, eyes bright with wonder. She didn't need words to express her gratitude or amazement. Kieran smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years of isolation. Together, they had survived, adapted, and now the danger had passed, at least for the moment. As the dust settled and the alien faction retreated, Kieran and Lyra made their way down from the roof. The human ships landed nearby, sending teams to secure the area. Kieran felt a strange pride. Humanity had once again proven its resilience, its intelligence, and its determination to protect those in need. And now, Lyra had become part of that story. One of the human operatives approached, speaking in rapid language. Lyra raised her hand, and Kieran translated roughly, explaining her escape and the faction's pursuit. The humans nodded, understanding the stakes. Lyra would be safe now, but Kieran knew she would never be entirely free of the galaxy's dangers. Night fell, and the valley was quiet again. Kieran and Lyra sat beside a small campfire, sharing the warmth, the silence, and a sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the unknown together. In doing so, they had formed a bond stronger than fear, stronger than distance, stronger than species. Kieran looked at Lyra, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes, the curiosity that had driven her to survive, and the trust she had placed in him. He felt a deep sense of connection, not just to her, but to the broader truth of humanity, that courage, ingenuity, and empathy could triumph even in the harshest corners of the universe. Lyra curled up beside him as she had on the first night, small and delicate yet full of strength. Kieran felt a rare peace settle over him. The universe was still dangerous, vast, and unpredictable, but for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Together they had faced impossible odds, and survived. Together they would continue to face whatever came next. The stars shone above, vast and eternal, and Kieran allowed himself a quiet hope that the galaxy, in all its chaos, might also hold places of trust, companionship, and new beginnings. And in the corner of a lonely planet, a human and an alien girl, strangers once, had found not just survival, but the start of a shared life, a bond forged in danger, courage, and the quiet miracle of understanding. The night deepened, the fire crackled softly, and Kieran knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together.